Welcome to the Awakened Parent Project, conscious conversations, empowered parenting with me, Susan Dolci. It's time to open our hearts and our minds to what it means to be a parent, exploring and expanding the ways we communicate, validate, and show up daily for our kids. With a parent-centric focus, you learn to become more present, a better active listener, more reflective, more engaged, and mutually empowered. Parenting isn't about perfection. It's about presence, honesty, self-compassion, unconditional love, and conscious communication. The Awakened Parent Project starts now. Hey everybody, welcome to the Awakened Parent Project. I'm your host, Susan Dolci. I'm a certified parent coach with the Jai Institute for Parenting, and it's my hope that you will find this a safe space to journey on a journey of both practical and spiritual self-exploration. From the time my first daughter was born in 1994, I'd been driven by a vision where children are nurtured both physically and spiritually by adults who are present, grounded, and empowered. I believe that conscious communication and self-exploration and self-forgiveness are the tools that enable parents to foster deep, lasting connections with their children. Parenting isn't about perfection. It's about presence, honesty, self-compassion, unconditional love, and conscious communication. And today, I'm so excited for this topic. Today, we are talking about how to be better parents by employing the Enneagram. And my guest today is Ann Gadd. Ann is the author of 36 books, including Better Parenting with the Enneagram, which we're going to talk about today, Sex and the Enneagram, the Enneagram of Eating, Paint by Numbers, which is art and the Enneagram. See, I've always pronounced it Enneagram, so now I have to retrain my brain. And a 10-part children's series of Enneagram books. She is a certified Enneagram practitioner and a professional member of the International Enneagram Association. She lives in Cape Town, South Africa with her artist husband. And it was a little bit of a jostle to arrange for this interview because we are crossing so many time zones. Okay, I can't say I'm a student of the Enneagram. I can say that Enneagram. I can say that I'm an enthusiast, and my first introduction to it was a book by Richard Rohr. So it was on spirituality and personal development using the Enneagram. So when this book came, when they sent me this book, when it crossed my path, I was like, this is fascinating. Oh, kitty. I thought this is a fascinating thing because I've never considered how to include, or I never crossed my mind to use the Enneagram with parenting styles. So let's get to the basics. What is the Enneagram?
The Enneagram has been very much popularized as a personality profiling system. And that is part of it, but it never was the intention to be the whole of it. So that's just an aspect of it. If you look at the symbol, it's a circle which symbolizes wholeness, completeness, and so on. And then there's a triangle in the middle, which can relate to an active force, a passive force, and a reconciling force. There are many instances of three, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and so on in a lot of different religions. So there's an enormous amount of symbolism, and then of course you have the hexa, the other glyph, if you like, in the middle of it. So that's the symbol itself, which has been around for thousands of years. It's not a new symbol that someone just paid some designer to do in their backyard one day. So that carries with it a huge amount of significance, and it really could be likened to the trajectory of life in terms of what it encompasses is really our passage through life to develop ourselves. Mm-hmm. As an aspect of that, and obviously it's the most popular aspect, there is the personality types, which is the 9 different points that sit on, you kind of probably see it behind my head a bit, mm-hmm. that sit on each connecting point on the circle. And from those, we get 9 different personality types. And that's the basic of it, but there's so much more to the Enneagram than simply your type. Because where the Enneagram differs from, well, certainly any other personality profiling system I know, is that it gives you an insight into how you can grow. So it's not just saying you are this, that's it. It's saying you are this, but here's how you could be so much closer to your authentic self. And it also allows you to see where you disintegrate or become unhealthy in your type. Because ironically, so often when we're at our most unhealthiest, we don't recognize it because our ego then takes control, and we assume that we're actually doing amazing stuff. Or either only one here. He's experienced that, you know. So I think it's a hard insight, because if we're to take the Enneagram more than just, oh yay, I'm a type 6 or whatever type we find ourselves to be, it really does peel away any illusions we might have had about ourselves. So we become conscious of when we're disintegrating or becoming less healthy. And then we have a conscious choice. Do I choose to let this happen? I mean, if you take blame, oh, it's so nice to blame people. I mean, isn't it just wonderful? But we now know what we're doing, and we know what neuroses are playing in our lives. And we then have to make the choice. I don't actually want to be that person anymore. And then we encounter that hard task of sort of moving ourselves up. What Ross Hudson and Don Riso called it the levels of health.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the 9 different identified levels of us in our most healthy, enlightened state, and obviously not so enlightened.
So
do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do. So because I know initially I took the test a long time ago, and I didn't recall what my type was. And so you mentioned in your book, Catherine Favre's tri-type. So I thought that was really interesting because because we're not just one we're never just one of these types. We're integrated. We've got, several different aspects of them that make up our personality. What I'm curious about, and I'll get to what my tri-type was in a minute, and then we can talk. I had my kids. I have 3 adult daughters. I'm like, will you please do this for me? Because I'm so curious. Is over your lifetime, would you actually change? Would your dominant type change? Or are you always your dominant type, and maybe you just different aspects of your personality, as you use the word in your book, integrate a lot. So if you are, if you're aware of your shadow sides or the places where you're not integrated, and so you'd be like a more healthy version of your personality type. I'm just curious, can they change?
No.
No.
You come into this world and you have certain neuroses, which you then create certain defense mechanisms. Mm-hmm. And those remain the same. You can't change your upbringing or your experience of that. So you don't change the type, but there are certain things that you change. The wings, which are the numbers on either side of you, those can strengthen or weaken as you get older or in certain situations. So you can have if you were, let's take a 7, you might have a stronger 8 wing in the workplace, and the number below it is 6, and you might have a stronger 6 wing at home. It doesn't necessarily need to say that everywhere you've got a stronger 8 wing or so on. So the wings change things, and then the social, the instinctual drives, mm-hmm. that they can strengthen and weaken over time depending on circumstances. So if you were living in like the Ukraine at the moment, the chances are your self-preservation instinct would be a lot stronger because of the circumstances. So those change, but your type never changes. And just to talk about the tri-types, basically we have a head center, a heart center, and a body center. And 3 of each of the 9 types fit into one of those 3 centers. So what the tri-type does is identify in each center which is your most dominant type. Uh-huh. But it's almost a study of its own. The same as instinctual drives. You can almost make a study of those that have nothing to do with Enneagrams. Well, I suppose from Catherine's point, yes, there is one type, strength of personality type in each type, but your type doesn't change, no. But
Yeah. So
there again, people of the same type can look very different depending on those instinctual drives, depending on their wings, and also depending on how emotionally healthy they are or not. Make a big difference.
Yeah, I could see, because I could see where, and actually just maturity, because what is so great about your book is that you go through each of the types and you describe the dominant features and also of a child. But then at the whole second part of the book is how parents interact with those personality types. I'm a 2 parent, and how do I interact with my 6th child or my 8th child? And I thought that is just a brilliant advice and so much insight there. I've got a lot to get into. We're going to take a break here in a second, but I'm going to say that when I did the tri-type, which is a very different test than I've ever taken before, because it's more visual. Catherine, it's pronounced Favre, that one?
Lefauve, I think, yeah.
Oh, okay. Because it's a lot of visual, it's words and pictures versus questions. There are some, but I was really fascinated by that. I had my youngest daughter actually take that test. When I took it, I am a 296, which apparently there's a lot of kerfluffle around 9 and 6 being secondary. So that kind of confused me. I'd like you to maybe shed some light on that. So when I got my other 2 kids to take it this morning, they did not take that one because they didn't have time. Now I can totally see, and I can't wait to talk to you about this, how I was a different parent to each kid, because they needed different things from me. So we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Awakened Parent Project, and we'll be back in a little bit. Welcome back. You're listening to the Awakened Parent Project. I'm Susan Dolci, and today my guest is Ann Gadd. She's an expert in the Enneagram, and we're talking about how to be a better parent with the Enneagram, which is also the name of her most recent book. And where can people connect with you? Where can they find you?
My website is Enneagrams, and that's ENNEA, grams, GRAMS, 9, the numerical 9, paths.com. So Enneagrams, 9paths.com.
And we can get your book where?
It's published by Inner Traditions and Little Bear, so it would be available via them or Amazon, or your nearest bookshop should be able to lead you in its direction. It launched today, in fact, so it's very fortuitous. But yeah,
congratulations! Yeah. Well, I was happy to get an advance copy, and I just think I really recommend this book to all the parents all parents, but especially if you're coming up, if you seem to be butting heads and you don't understand why your child is, your personalities clash, this book is a goldmine. So before the break, I mentioned I took that tri-type test, and I'm a 296, and there were all these flags about if you're a 9 and a 6, you might be mistyped. Could you explain that a little bit to me? Because I was very confused.
Sure. I really don't want to touch too much on tri-types because it's just I think it's complicated early. But if I answer your question, 9 simply because they tend to merge with other people. So, for instance, early part of my life, I worked in an advertising agency as a creative director, and I became very 7ish because that was the environment that I worked and lived in. It wasn't who I was, but I was very influenced, and that's what happens with 9s. They get very influenced. If I had spent a lot of time, my husband's a 5, so having spent 35 years with him, I think now, I've got a lot of very, very 5ish traits about me, and that's because of the merging. So I could pick myself up in quite a few types. And in fact, I never wanted to be. I'm a 9. I never wanted to be a 9. I saw the word sloth and I thought, well, that can't possibly be me. I mean, 5,500 paintings, 37 books, really, So we often find ourselves in the type we least want to be. And teaching, I've had that so often that a lot of the problem is our resistance to actually owning who we are, because we see things that push our buttons. And with sixes, also difficult to identify, because sixes, I think it's true to say they can be a rebel, and they can be conforming. They can be
they're like a chameleon of sorts.
That's a 3.
Oh, okay.
3s do it calculatingly, but 6s do it. They can be both. So in the workplace, they might be quite rebellious, but in their society, they might be very conforming. And they might show incredible courage, but actually, a lot of the time, they live in huge fear. So there are these sort of polar opposites that can be confusing. For instance, if you take a type 6, they often they can be quite neat, and they're very neat. And then you think, oh well, they obviously must be a type 1, because type 1s are the ones, there's a right way to do everything. So obviously, but it's not necessarily they're being neat, but they're being neat because if they aren't neat, something bad's going to happen. So they demonstrate the same behavior, but for a completely different reason.
Right. The motivation is completely different.
Correct. Yeah. So I often see 6s and I think they're 8s until I get to know them a bit better, and I just push them a little bit, and then a 6 will collapse, whereas an 8 will come straight back at you. But they sort of mask their fear with courage. Sometimes, not all of them.
So if I were to boil it down to one word, and granted you're the expert in this, but so 9s are like the peacekeepers, like, right?
Absolutely.
No, don't want any conflict, want everything to be harmonious. And so the first time, because I think I took 3 different ones, because I just wanted to, like, the 9 first felt really right, but it didn't feel spot on. And the first one said I was a 9. And I'm like, yes, because I want to avoid conflict at all costs. And I want my family to, like, if you were to look at our family values, for me, it's harmony. Like, I want, I've always been, especially when you have 3 daughters, you can imagine how harmony was really important to me, because that's never the case. But so when I took the next test and it said I was a 2, I really identified with that. But so one of the questions we have here are, can you give some examples of like 9 type strengths and weaknesses? And because, like, you would think a harmonious, like wanting harmony, and like that would be, like, to me, the ideal parent. When I guess none of them are ideal. It's all how we mix with each other. But how is 9 not an ideal parent?
Because they can often battle with boundaries, which is the same thing for 2s. So because they don't want to cause conflict, they don't want to say no to their children.
Permissiveness. Yeah.
So they become too accepting, too permissive, too all embracing, that everything's fine. And sometimes that's not okay when you're a parent. Sometimes you have to take a tough line. You have to say no. And often in merging with their children, it becomes all about parenting, all about the children, and they neglect themselves. And
guilty as charged.
Yeah. So it becomes, but there are elements of that in 2, which is why the 2 can be confused. But whereas 2s will definitely move to the 8 and sort of really can become angry and antagonistic. 9s, it tends to just come out in small bursts, and then they think, oh my goodness, everyone's going to leave me. I'm going to be all on my own, so I better just not do that again. And then it's sort of retreating backwards, and and I think what 9s do as well, because they often sit with a lot of anger because they don't express it. 2s would be more likely to express anger. 9s would be less likely to. So what happens is it sort of builds up, and then they can start becoming, they can sulk, they can become passive aggressive. Because if we've
Also
got
guilty
anger,
as charged. If my kids are listening, they're like, yeah, that sounds like my mom. Okay.
it needs to come out. And also they're physical things, once again, this is a huge generalization, but nines often tend to move slower. They often have sort of slightly sleepy eyes. You can see I've got slightly lazy sort of, so they because we tend to fall asleep to ourselves. We tend to fall asleep to self-care and looking after ourselves, and to giving ourselves the time that we need to grow, because it becomes all about the others, which is not particularly healthy at all.
No, sounds like it's the thing I always talk about, or in several interviews in the past. I'm like, don't be the martyr mom. But, I was also over here going, I can tell you why you shouldn't be the martyr mom, because you're going to make yourself sick.
The difference though with twos, because they say they are similar, but twos, it's normally about another person, to the point that, yes, they will be martyrs, they will be self-sacrificial. But what the difference is, they're doing it hoping that they get something back, that people reciprocate in a way, whereas nines are just doing it to keep the peace. Just as long as everyone's happy, I'm fine. So there's a subtle difference, and that's how you pick up the two different types.
So I'm going to backtrack a little bit here, because we've been talking about it, but I haven't really asked specifically how using the Enneagram can help us be better parents.
All of us have aspects of ourselves we're not aware of. Our egos are trying to protect us from these things which it has perceived are bad, but often they're not bad, but we perceive them as such. So what happens is we are blindsided, and there's a part of us, I don't know if you're familiar with Johari's window, where there's an aspect of ourselves that everyone knows. There's an aspect of ourselves everyone knows and we know, and there's another part of the window where other people know but we don't see it, and there's a part where we see it but other people don't, and there's another, the fourth quarter is that nobody sees it. And so the Enneagram sheds light on that. It allows us to become aware of what we're not seeing. So in the parenting book, I'm looking at the good aspects of each type's parenting, the positive things they can bring, and then the types that they might be not aware of. So for instance, a fun, exuberant, extroverted 7 may not be conscious of the fact that sometimes, and depending on what type their children are, sometimes their child just needs to go and be alone in a room and not be rushing off having fun and adventures. And until they recognize that, they could be making their child wrong. What's your problem? I mean, you just want to sit in your room the whole time, And in fact, all it is a misunderstanding of their needs and their children's needs. And I think once we understand that, once we understand what sort of parents we are, we can then open ourselves up to working with the positive aspects of ourselves, and then encouraging those in our children.
We're coming up on another break. I want to, so like I said, I have 3 adult daughters. So it was easy for me to say, hey, you guys want to help me out? You want to take this? Are you curious? And I have kids that love this kind of stuff. And so they were all like, yeah, sure. But I think if I had your book when they were little, I think I would have struggled to, I don't know, maybe not. It's just because it's been 20-ish years ago. So my oldest is about to be 28. But my question is, when we come back, I'd like to ask you, how can you type your children if they're little, they're still like little ones? Because you talk about in your book, you talk about when they're like, elementary school age, and then here's what they might do as a teenager. And short of them taking the test, which is okay when they're adults, I would like some insight on how we can identify our children's types when they're growing up. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Awakened Parent Project, and we'll be back in a little bit. We're back. This is the Awakened Parent Project. I'm Susan Dolci. I'm here with Ann Gadd, who's an expert in the Enneagram, and her new book just launched today, Better Parenting with the Enneagram, and that's Enneagram. Old habits die hard, Susan. And so before the break, I was asking how do you type a child who's a young child? Like I had 3 adult daughters. I asked them all to take the test. They were like, this is fun. And so I was saying in the break, but I'm going to say it again. So my oldest daughter is an 8. And so in 3, so it's 863. My middle daughter is a 249, and my youngest is a 628. And you were saying how having an 8 and a 3 in a child is a very strong personality type.
Well, they're both confronting types. So let's just forget about the fly type thing. If we just look at the 8.
Yeah, just the 8.
8s enjoy a good fight. They love to stand up against the world, and they don't respect you if you don't give them a solid wall to stand up against.
Maybe that's why she's in politics.
Perfect occupation. They like to be in charge, and it's frustrating for them not to be in charge, not to be taking care of things, So they're very nurturing, warm-hearted, big-hearted people. Mm-hmm. But they are used to walking into a room and sort of sassing out who the opposition is, and then assuming control, and
absolutely.
There's a lot of good things about that, I love being with 8s because they make me feel safe, I've got your back here, mm-hmm. Provided they like you. If they don't like you, then it's not so good.
Oh, so, trust me, I know. But like in your book, go ahead. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, and then your 6th daughter would be more, I wonder what can go wrong here. Is there a problem? Do you think that person means that when they say that? So there's much more high alert, suspicion, mm-hmm. Fear involved there. Yeah. One of the
I'm quoting this from the book regarding I think it was the 8 child, but you said if you say, go to your room or something, they'd be like, gorilla snot to you, because like, I'm not going to my room. Oh, she was definitely the door slammer. She was I hate you kid, and for me, like as her parent, it was just like, I never took any of that stuff personally. It was just like, you're having an outburst, whatever is stressing you, like, I don't feel disrespected. I don't feel not loved. I just know that this is your reactive response, and it's all going to be okay. You're going to calm down. And they've all grown up to be very self-aware, I believe. And aware of how their strong points and their weaknesses. So, I mean, I think they're, and it's the knowing the weaknesses that is important. So you don't, disintegrate into the ugly parts. But so, okay. So like I said, I have 3 adult daughters. So it was easy for me to say, hey guys, would you do this for me? Cause I've got this great interview coming up. And, but what do you do when you have little ones?
All right. This is a very shark-infested ocean to walk across. So here's my take on it. I believe that we are born with our type. I mean, it's like our destiny. So that doesn't change. But because children mimic the behavior of other children, it's very difficult to ascertain a type much before they're about 7, I would say. But okay. There again, I'm going to backtrack and say certain children, and I found, for instance, 8 children, just automatically assume that role of being in charge from a very young age, and that strong will and that kind of behavior. So there's some children that it just seems to flow out of what their type is. But I remember us saying that you must hold your truths lightly, like a little bird, so that you can let them go when and if you need to. So I think there's a great danger in telling a very young child, oh, you're just being a type whatever. Because I think they can then almost assume that role when maybe they're not. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just because they're best friends like that. So I think it's an observation role that as parents we can play. I can see a lot of this kind of behavior in my child arising. So let me work with that. and work with whatever I feel would best enhance that child's personality. After all, at the end of the day, we are all the types. Mm-hmm. So if you end up finding out 20 years later that you were working more with their wing, you still would have helped them. It's, it's still going to benefit them to be seen and heard. But I think where it can be very harmful is to jump up behind your child or anyone else and say, oh, you're just being a typical type, whatever. So I think it's something that has to be handled gently. With my own children, I mistyped my daughter. I thought she was a 2 with a 3 wing, and it turned out she was a 3 with a 2 wing. With my son, I thought he was a 9, and he turned out to be a 6. But 6s moved to 9, so he was displaying a lot of 9 behavior. So it's very seldom that you're completely wrong, but it's and working with these 9 was a good thing. And encouraging those aspects of where 9s sometimes fall short was not a harmful thing. But I would caution telling everyone at your book club, what your young child is when they're in hearing distance.
Well, and so, like you said, we are all aspects of, we have all the types in us to some degree. And so it made me think, like, just reading the book, you offer so much good advice, regardless of knowing exactly what type your child is. It's, so if you notice that your child, tends to, they re-energize because they need alone time, or, you have Miss Bossy Pants who, bosses all the kids around at school, and, you've got school issues with that. I really cannot recommend this book enough. I really, really love this. And because it's not just knowing your child's type, it's about understanding parent-child relationships on all sorts of levels with all sorts of different personality types. So I have a question. So, like, how have you seen this at work? How have you, besides in your own life, how have you seen using Enneagram? I gotta learn to say it right. How have you seen this help parents and children?
I believe all of us want to be heard. We want to be understood. I think it's deep within all of our natures. We want to reclaim that lost childhood message that we maybe didn't get, that we want to get. So what the Enneagram does is, in allowing parents to truly see their children, there's an enormous degree of acceptance and compassion that comes into that. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, I was, in fact, this was told to me by another coach. There was a family where they came to see her because they had a child that they just couldn't understand. They were all far more extroverts. They were rushing off, doing stuff, busy. And this child didn't want to do anything. They were 5, and 5s get drained by people. And 5s are the observers of the world. They want to sit and they want to be with their thoughts, and they take a long time to process their emotions. And so this constantly making out that there was something wrong with this little boy. He wasn't that little, he was about 10, I suppose, because he was just being who he was. So can you imagine the relief to that child when his parents finally got him, mm-hmm. and they finally understood, oh, he's just being a 5. He needs time alone. There's nothing wrong with him because he's not having friends every 5 minutes, That's how his little soul and spirit develops and grows. And now we can look at encouraging the very best part of him, as opposed to making him wrong. And I think that's really what it is, whether it's in your own personal relationship, understanding your partner, because we all have this deluded idea that everyone should behave the way we do. And unless they do, they're somehow wrong. And so we spend our lives being frustrated because, well, he really should be like this, or she isn't doing that, or whatever. And why would they be? Because they have different lessons to learn in this life. They have different neuroses that they're trying to cope with. And in understanding that, you get a lot less judgmental view of other people. And I think that is the beauty, to me, of the Enneagram.
absolutely agree that because I also I've talked about this a lot, is that I think when couples are pregnant, you have these dreams and these ideas of what your child's going to do or be like, and it's like, oh, like I was a dancer, or I want my child to be a dancer or plays this sport. And we put all of these ideas onto our children, or hopes and dreams, when regardless, without even knowing what their personality is. Or, like you said, what do they come here to learn? What is this soul journey for them? And as I say, and I'm going to say it again at the end of the show, one of the things that I find so beautiful about being a parent is if we can open up and allow our children to be our awakening as well, and to help us find the spots that need to grow, and where we need to learn more compassion or patience or whatever. It's a gift both ways. Like, we are both learning and growing from each other. We're going to take one more break. I'm talking with Ann Gadd. We're talking all things Enneagram, and we'll be back in a little bit. Welcome back. This is the Awakened Parent Project. I'm Susan Dolci. We are talking about better parenting with the Enneagram with author Ann Gadd, who's written many, many books on the Enneagram. Her website is Enneagrams, ENNEAGRAMS, not just M, but the S, Enneagrams9paths.com. And her book was just released today. And that's what we're talking about today. What a wonderful resource. I cannot recommend it enough. I wish I'd had it when my kids were little. So what happens? I don't have none of my children. Well, I guess my middle daughter supposedly has my dominant type. She's a type 2. But what happens when if you are the same type as your child? Does that lead to more problems? Is it, like you were talking about merging before? Is it easier to, tell me the pitfalls of having a kid that's the same type as you?
Here, I think it very much depends on how, those levels of integration I spoke of earlier, how healthy you are emotionally, or integrated you are emotionally. So I think it doesn't matter what types you are, but if you are disintegrated, it's not going to be a happy scenario. I've yet to see people who are in the lower levels of average and below who have wonderfully fulfilling, happy relationships. In different ways, they're not happy, but they're not happy. So I think the same would go if you are the same type. So I think on the one hand, it's positive because it gives you an understanding of that child, and a closeness maybe. But on the other hand, let's say if you were an 8 and you had an 8 child, boy, oh boy, would there be fireworks in that house. So there would be huge fights, massive, reconciliations, and then, so it would be quite a fiery place to be, that relationship. Whereas you might find if there were 2 9s, there could be a lot of not really saying how they felt, a lot of passive aggressiveness, a lot of withholding. So it's, the old thing about opposites attract. So there's sometimes is good. And what I often find is that you'll notice the lines between the numbers. So those are called the lines of stretch and release. And
yes, I was going to ask, I'm so glad, because I was going to specifically ask about this, because I really had never heard about this part of it before. So
what those can do is, let's say you have a 1 who moves to a 7. So you are, let's say, the 1 parent, strict. There's ways to do things, it's black or white. There's a right way to do stuff. And then you have a child who's a 7. Well, that's almost your shadow, because they represent fun, freedom, expression. So that's where you need to move to. And your child can help you move there because they're the very expression. But that doesn't mean to say that there aren't going to be issues along the way, because you're going to be trying to curtail their freedom and they're not going to enjoy that. Whereas if you were both 1s, you could potentially both be out disciplining each other. But once again, I say this, it all boils down to how much you have done the work in terms of emotional health integration.
And what about your partner? Like, what if I mean, are there certain pairings that seem to come together more often? You know what I mean? Like I could see where, like you said, opposites attract. Is that kind of the case? Do you see that?
There's the only couples that tend to marry the same type are fours. Other than that, it's very seldom the two people of the same type will marry, because there isn't that spark in the relationship. There isn't that, but it's that spark that causes the issue. So, for instance, you're married to a type 7. You had planned a quiet evening at home doing the crossword. 7 comes in, hey, I heard that there's people having a party, we want to go there, we want to do this stuff, and you were just this 9 planning a quiet little evening at home. There's going to be conflict, but it's a good thing, because maybe in getting you off your couch and doing things, that's going to help you grow. And maybe your quiet containment is going to help the 7 find stillness and find joy in the moment. So I think that it really does help us having partners who aren't our type, because it pushes us and stimulates us, annoying as it might be, to grow,
So I'm curious, since I don't know the types as well as you do, what is it about 4s why do they tend to pair up?
4s are searching for depth. They're searching for the depth in themselves. Mm. And so if they find somebody who is equally searching, there's a kind of deep connection that comes between the two of them, where words don't have to be spoken, where they interrelate in this us against the world kind of vibe, which can be a really beautiful thing, because 4s are the romantics of the world. But it can also mean that there isn't that stimulation to really grow and move beyond that little coupling.
I can think of a couple right now. When you said that, I was like trying to think of, that's why I was curious about 4s. I was like, I know a couple like that, and they also don't have any children.
Yeah, well, you see, because children would break that sense of us,
Yeah. So, because we're coming up here on the end, unfortunately, because I still have so much to ask. But so, what makes this? I had never encountered any literature on parenting and the Enneagram, but apparently there are others out there. And so, how is your book different from the others?
Well, very simply because no one else has tackled the issue of a parent with a child and what effect that's going to have. So there's 81 different combinations, both at their healthiest state and at their less healthy state, is something that hasn't been tackled before. And then there are lots of other things. I think the book is more in depth than probably another book that I'm aware of that's been around for quite a long time. Well, it is more in depth. I mean, there's a lot more information. And it also provides things like teenagers. So it incorporates teenagers, a section on each type with the teenagers. It very specifically spells out ways for each type as a parent to grow, and the things you can acknowledge that are good about yourself and your parenting skills. And that I don't believe has been done. Certainly I'm not aware of any book like that. So there are a lot of differentials like that. And then I think also looking at the lost messages for each child and how those can have a profound effect. I had a friend of mine the other day having lunch with her. She's a psychologist, so she has done a fair bit of work on herself, in tears when I just spoke her lost childhood message. So that can have a profound effect. So that I don't think has been put in any parenting book before. So yeah.
Well, it definitely is a treasure trove of information, and you do go way in depth. I was going through the second part where it was parent-child, and I appreciated the most about the teenager aspect of it, and knowing like they might have a propensity to be more promiscuous, or might want to self-medicate, and so it was just It is an amazing book. I highly recommend it. You can find out more about Ann at her website, enneagrams9paths.com, and you can get her book. I always encourage you to go to your local bookshop, but Amazon is also there. Thank you, Ann, so much for today. This has been wonderful. And now I know because of this, I know my kids' personality types. Wish I had known it when they were little. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been really fun, and thank you for allowing me to share this information that I really believe can help so many parents and help us be better parents and raise healthier kids.
Yes, thank you so much. As I always say, there's no such thing as a perfect parent. Stop that, throw that out the door. But perhaps we can maybe consider conscious parenting is about allowing your child to be your awakening. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for being a part of the Awakened Parent Project. My goal with this show is to help us all become more compassionate and engaged parents by diving into the many techniques and ideologies of the conscious parenting community. This is a safe space to embark on a practical and spiritual journey of self-exploration and expand our ideas about conscious parenting. Got thoughts, questions, ideas? I want to hear from you. Reach out to me if there's a topic you'd like to hear covered on the show, or to share your conscious parenting story by visiting susandolci.com.